Welcome to The Joe Show, a podcast that has real conversations with real people about topics that really matter to you. And now your podcast host, Joe Amaral.
Bruised but not broken. That's the title of today's podcast. And so let me just give you a little bit of background and explain why I've arrived at that title for today's podcast. So I want you to think about it this way. Have you ever maybe you ran into something, or somebody ran into you, or you got hit by something like right in the chest, and man, you got hit so hard and it felt like you just busted your ribs right out, but you weren't sure. So you go to the hospital, you get an x-ray done, and you're relieved when you find out, oh, nothing's been broken, but your ribs are really, really bruised. Just because your ribs aren't broken, it doesn't mean you're not in any pain. It doesn't mean that you're not hurting really bad. Of course you are. The bruising of your ribs, the bruising of, your leg, wherever it is that you're hit, it hurts, man. And sometimes it can hurt like hell. Just because it's not broken, it doesn't mean that the bruising doesn't hurt. And so why I'm going about it this way and explaining it to you is because today I'm going to do something very, very different on the podcast. In fact, it's something that I've never, ever done before in my life. And for the first time, I want to share and talk about my male childhood sexual abuse. It's something that I know that I've been wanting to talk about, and I've wanted to share it with people to help them not just understand what I've been through, but for the men who are listening, for the millions of men out there who have gone through the same thing, and they've had nobody to kind of look to hear their story, to understand what they've went through and how they've had to cope with it and how they've had to deal with it. And so I know that it's something that I'm supposed to do, and I just feel like now is the time to do it. In fact, this is being released on Sexual Abuse Awareness Day. April is Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, but today is the actual day where that particular thing is being not honored, but it's being looked at and it's being talked about. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do when it comes to this issue, is that we need to be real about it, and we need to be open and honest. And one of my hopes is that maybe somebody was Googling today because you're a man and it's something that you've been through. And you're like, oh my God, how do I even talk about this? How do I share this with my wife or with my friends or with my pastor or with my counselor or whatever it is? And you maybe just thought, let me Google it and see if there's anything out there on this day, on Sexual Abuse Awareness Day, and you've stumbled onto this podcast. And I just want to let you know that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to be open, to be honest about not just about what happened to you, but about the struggles that you've had ever since the moment that you realized what happened. And if you're like me and you're listening to this, you were even unaware that it had happened to you. I mean, oh my goodness, I was a little boy, like anywhere from 9 to 11 years old when this happened to me. And it wasn't until I was 45 years old that my mind allowed my body to understand why it was that I was going through the things that I was. And so I just wanted to have a really open and frank conversation about what happens to a man when this happens to him as a boy. And so in a moment, I'm going to throw it to, it was February 22nd, and I was in Israel, and it was right before the COVID-19 outbreak, and I was there by myself. I wasn't feeling that great, so I didn't go out that day. It was kind of cloudy and overcast, a little bit rainy, and it was really dark in my room. And I'm sitting there in the hotel just remembering and thinking about all the things, not just that had happened to me, but all the things that I went through as a result of what happened to me. And the room was like literally getting darker and darker by the moment. And I thought, God, it's like being bit by a poisonous snake, and the toxin is just making its way, coursing its way through your veins. And I thought, I've got to get it out, or this thing's going to kill me. Maybe not physically, but certainly emotionally and spiritually. And so I decided to just to throw my AirPods into my ears. And so the recording that you're about to hear, it's not the greatest recording in the world, but I did it for me at the time. So I threw my AirPods in and I just hit record on the little free app, that comes on your iPhone. And so this is what came out. And just before I go to that, I need to put a warning out there for anybody listening today. It is a very strong, an open and raw conversation. I was in a real dark place. I was at a really low time in my life, and I had to get the toxin out, and I had to be really, really open and honest about it. So there are some sexually explicit sections in my story, but you can't candy coat or sugar coat this thing. You can't do a polished presentation. I think the only way to really get the conversation going and to make other people comfortable about speaking about it is just to be open, honest, and transparent. So what you're about to hear is as raw as you can get. And then at the end of it, I'm going to come back and give you some closing thoughts. But now let me take you to February 22nd, 2020, to one of my darkest hours in my hotel room in Jerusalem, Israel. Man, where do you even start a conversation like this? I'm not really sure. There's no script, there's no timeline, no deadline, nothing. I'm in a hotel room in Jerusalem, and I'm just kind of alone with my thoughts. And it's something that I've wanted to talk about for a few years now, but I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know where to say it. And then we recently decided to launch a podcast called The Joe Show. And the intro says, that it's a podcast with real people having, real discussions about topics that really matter. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot to live up to. I think this episode is going to live up to that. And so I just want to start off by saying that if there are little ears out there, if you're a mom or dad, and you have kids who usually listen to the podcast with you, because, my stuff tends to be a little bit lighter, a little more on the entertainment side, but today's a much, much more heavy topic. So you as a parent decide if it's something you think your kids should hear. There's going to be some sexually explicit conversation, nothing, no swear words or anything like that, but the content itself is it's a lot darker, it's a lot heavier. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, but I want to let you decide as moms and dads and guardians and parents of whether or not this is something you want them to hear. So just give me a second to go ahead and get them out of the room if you feel you need to do that. Or if you want them to hear this, maybe just hit pause for a minute and explain to them, the seriousness of childhood sexual abuse and the reality of that. And so just if you want to take a moment and explain that to them, then come back and we'll continue with the podcast. So there are basically two Joe Amarols. There's the Joe Amaral that you see, the guy who was on the archaeology, weekly TV show, the guy you saw on Huntley Street, the guy you saw on TV interviews, kind of like the happier-go-lucky, funny kind of a guy, really passionate about the stuff that I know and that I study. There's that Joe Amaral, there's the Joe Amaral you would see on a church platform or in a conference platform. Again, really passionate about what I would talk about, and I love to use humor. And at the time, I didn't know why I used so much humor. Sometimes you think, oh, I'm funny. I didn't know until a little bit later that I was actually using humor as a defense mechanism, as a way to deflect and reflect, what was going on inside of me. And I didn't even know what was going on inside of me, but I knew something was going on. And it all kind of came to a head in 2015. 2015 was a really, really bad year. It was a dark year, and I'm sure some of you out there could relate. Maybe not to the extent of the darkness that I was living in, but we have days, we have months, and sometimes we have years where we just live in absolute darkness and utter helplessness and hopelessness, and we're wondering, what the heck is going on? Why am I feeling like this? And even thoughts of, should I even go on? What am I doing? If people knew what I was really struggling with, if people knew what was really inside my head, if people really knew who Joe Amaral was, God, I would lose everything. I wonder how many people will still want to come and hear me preach or buy my books or watch my show or listen to my podcast. I wonder, and you go through this debate, this argument with yourself of whether or not it's worth it to continue, whether it's worth it to go on. Is it fair for my spouse to have to live with a guy who's going through this darkness? Is it fair for children to have, a parent, to have a dad who's living in such darkness, who's going through so many struggles? And these are real thoughts that I was having. And in 2015, when I say end it, I don't mean take my life. It wasn't a suicidal thing for me. It was more like I should just get up, walk out, and never be heard from again by anyone. That would be the best thing for my family, for my fans, for my friends, for my ministry, for my health. It'll just be the best thing if I just go and walk away, and nobody will ever have to deal with me again. And I can run. I can hide from all the shame that I'm feeling because of the things that I'm thinking, about the things that I'm doing, and I can just, be a hermit in the hills by myself, and that'll be the best thing for everyone. That's how dark it got for me. That was 2015, 2016, a year of absolute hell. And then in 2016, I started to, rise out of that, and I went and got some help, and then it got healthier in 2017, 2018, and now into 19 and 20. But I tell you, it was a really, really difficult experience. So I just wanted to be true to what I've gone through. I want to be true to what I said I would do on this podcast, that I would be real, and that we would have just open and real conversations. You can sugarcoat abuse, you can sugarcoat, the experiences that you've gone through, but I don't think that helps anybody. I think people who have gone through it, they know how awful it is. They understand how horrible it is and how difficult it is to get through it. So to sugarcoat it is doing a disservice to anybody who has struggled with this. And so if you're listening today and you're someone who has struggled or struggles because of sexual abuse in your past, whether it was as a child or as a grown-up, as a male, as a female, by a male or by a female, whatever it was, you've been struggling and are struggling with the effects of sexual abuse on your life, then this is a conversation that I think you need to be a part of, a conversation that you need to hear. And so in 2015, I began to change, and I really felt it. I was always the life of the party. You put me in a room, and it's not like I even had to try. I walk into a room, and I'm the storyteller, and I'm the joke teller, and everybody's gathering around me because Joe's going to be funny for sure. He's got some crazy story about some place he went to, and on one of his last trips, something amazing or great happened, and I just naturally would do that. That's just who I was, and I loved having people around me, and I loved the attention, to be honest with you. The more people, the more attention, the better it was for me, for Joe Amaral, I loved it and people loved it. It was a great symbiotic relationship. And I would actually recharge by being around people. The more noise, the livelier it was, the more alive I became. And I didn't know at the time, that was all just a cover-up. That was all just a mask. That was all just an act. Because as long as the attention was on the fun and the loud, I didn't have to deal with the quiet and the crazy that was going on inside of me. And so I started to notice a change in my life near the end of 2015. I noticed that I was becoming much more agitated. I would get angry so quickly at small things that would just normally just roll off my shoulder, make a joke about it, haha, and then move on. And no, it would stick, and it would stay, and it would fester, and it would get worse. And I was like, whoa, that's not me. And this went on for several months, and it got to the point where, my dear wife was like, who are you? The guy I married is not the guy who is standing before me today. What's going on? And I couldn't articulate it because I didn't really know what was going on, to be honest. I just know that I was feeling agitated. And it got to the point where I couldn't even be around crowds anymore. I would have, how you feel claustrophobic when you're in an enclosed space? Well, I was getting socially phobic. I mean, if there were too many people around, like, oh my God, I can't breathe. And I just needed to retreat. I got to run away. I got to go somewhere. And I would literally get into the darkest room I could find in my house, and I would completely strip down and just lie there because I couldn't have anything on me, anything touching me, anything pushing against me. Anything was just, it would put me over the edge, and I would just lie there for hours and stare at nothing and think about nothing and just try to get my breathing under control, try to get my heart rate, which was pounding through my chest. I would just try and get that under control. Sometimes I would just go and stand under an ice cold shower and let the water just hit my head, and the heat that was rising in me, the anger that was rising in me, the cold water would it would counter it a little bit, and I would feel it start to drop, and then after a few hours I would be able to go back and face the world. And this started to happen more and more and more. I remember driving on the highway on the 401, and during rush hour, when there was a traffic jam, all the cars around me would be like, oh my God, I started to feel nervous. Even now talking about it, I can feel that feeling of anxiety begin to rise in me. People are too close, cars are too close, there's so many of them. Where we were living in our subdivision, the houses were too close to me, people were standing too close to me. It all got to be so overwhelming. I remember one family Christmas, we had about 50 people over at our house, and I come from a Portuguese background, and my culture is a loud culture, and it's totally normal. That's how I grew up. But all of a sudden, oh my gosh, 50 people in my house talking and yelling at the top of their lungs and having regular conversations. I would have to leave the party. I'd have to go upstairs and do what I said, just get down in a dark room and just breathe through it. And this began to escalate, and it became more and more and more of a regular thing. And then I began to get depressed. I mean, just darkly depressed. The smallest thing would set me off. Things that didn't bother me before, oh my goodness, began to bother me. Criticisms. I mean, I work in the public eye. People criticize you. That's fine. It's whatever. You move on with your life. But now the smallest criticism would just send me into a downward spiral. I thought, my God, what's going on with me? Why am I like this all of a sudden? Why do I get hurt so easily? And then, so I began to shake all the time. I would hold something and my hand would shake uncontrollably. I didn't know what was going on. And I said, this is going to be a dark conversation, so hit pause or walk away or whatever, but I'm just going to get really real. I began to bleed with all the stress and anxiety that I was feeling. Then that scared me. I thought, oh my God, do I have cancer? Is there something going on inside my body? Why am I bleeding? You're not supposed to bleed there. And what's happening? And that would make me more anxious. Got to the point where I went to go see my medical doctor, and she said I was having panic attacks. And she said, well, describe what you're going through. And I would say it to her, and she said, that's a textbook panic attack. I said, but I don't have panic attacks. She goes, yeah, you do. And you're mightily depressed, and so I want to put you on something. And so I think it was for a good 2 years I had to go on medication to help me with the depression, and that helped me, but it also dulled me. So I was just 2015, 2016, it was just the zombie version of Joe. I just, I wasn't happy, I wasn't sad, I wasn't super excited, I wasn't super depressed, I was just kind of meh. Just cruise control, lock it in at 50 and go. And that's it, whatever happens, happens. No real excitement, no real joy. Oh my God, it was such a horrible, horrible time in my life. Well, we're coming up to our 25th wedding anniversary. And right before, we were supposed to leave on the Monday to go down for our anniversary on December the 8th. And I was already booked and committed to go out west to go preach at a larger church. There was 2 services in the morning, and so I was committed to going to that. I remember not wanting to go because I was in a really, really bad place. So I'm hopped up on all these, prescription drugs just to keep me from falling into massive depression and from going into hysteria and having anxiety attacks. And I'd made the commitment, so I had to go. I didn't want to go, but you have to do what you commit to do. Now, just before I went out, Karen, my wife, and we had a conversation of what I was going through, and I said, I think something happened to me when I was a little bit younger. I think a couple of people in my life did things to me when I was younger. And I've had a few flashbacks throughout the years of these horrific, hurtful scenes. And I remember just kind of passing them off. And then I thought, well, where would I get these scenes from? I can see the guy's face. I know who that person is. They've been in my life a long time. Why am I seeing them doing that to me if that never happened? And so I found this book on male childhood sexual abuse, and it was called Not Quite Healed. And so I said, well, let me read it. Let me see, maybe, because the author went through the abuse as well. It was actually co-authored. The 2 guys shared their experiences, and I thought, well, it's probably nothing, but I should just read it anyways, just to see if there's anything in there that'll trigger something or maybe help me. So I thought, I'll read it on my flight, because I have quite a few hours flight to get to where I'm committed to preach. And so I'm reading through the book, and here I am, at 35,000 feet, sitting by myself, reading this book on the effects of a grown man who has gone through male childhood sexual abuse. And as I'm reading this book, oh my God, the floodgates open all of a sudden. What I had seen throughout my life, these little flashbacks here and there, they stopped being flashbacks, and all of a sudden it was like the video of what happened to me was being aired in my own head. And I saw the man who bent me over and dry raped me over and over again. And all of a sudden I remembered clearly. I knew who he was. I knew where it was when it happened, and I remember when it happened. Could you imagine? In 2 days I'm going to celebrate my 25th wedding anniversary. I'm flying that night because the next morning I got to preach at 2 big services at a big church, and at 35,000 feet I have the realization, oh my God, I was raped as a boy by a man in my life. I barely held myself together. I ran to the washroom, I locked the door, and I cried and I cried and I cried. it was just, I don't know, a mix of maybe things I'd seen in movies or something, but no, it happened to me. And I got to where I was going, and I went for a walk that night. And I remember saying out loud for the first time, I'd never said it before, but I was walking down the streets of the city, and I said, I was sexually abused by a man as a young boy. And when I said it out loud, it hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember saying, God, how am I going to go to this service tomorrow and preach and get up there and put on the mask, Joe. Put on the mask one more time. The mask you've been wearing all your grown life. The mask you've been wearing all your adult life. It's time to put it on one more time and go perform. And as I kept reading through this book, Not Quite Healed, and if anybody who's gone through this, I recommend that you get this, especially if you're a man. It's written by men for men who have gone through this. And one of the things they talked about is that we compensate because we don't want to think about the abuse, so we want to engage our brain in doing other things. And so a lot of men who are sexually abused as boys by men, they become very successful because they throw themselves into their work because they don't want to think about what happened to them, so they become very successful. And the one guy was actually a prolific writer. I said, hey, that's what I do. I'm writing books all the time. I'm producing videos all the time. I'm traveling the world all the time. Yeah, without even thinking about it. One of the mechanisms is to occupy your brain so that you don't stop long enough to be able to think and remember. And by the way, your brain does a really good job at burying it for you. It knows you're not ready and it buries it deep. But when it's time, when your brain realizes you're ready to deal with it, when you're ready to deal with it, no matter what you think you are or how strong you think you are, all of a sudden it begins to rise in you, and that's where your body begins to manifest. That's why there was the bleeding. That's why there was the anxiety, the depression, the rejection, the hurt. And I'd realized that I had been wearing a mask all my life of humor to hide all the pain that I was going through. Well, it got to the point where I just couldn't hide the pain anymore. So I got up at those 2 Sunday services, did what I had to do. Then I had to fly home late that night. And then the next morning, we had some crazy early flight. We had to be at the airport at something like 4 or 5 a.m., I think. And we had to fly down to Mexico just for 5 days for our 25th. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I got to tell my wife. I got to tell my wife what happened to me. She's going to leave me on our 25th wedding anniversary. When I tell her what happened to me, when I tell her what I've been doing, what I've been thinking, when she hears about it, oh my God, just even thinking about telling her, the shame was so great. It was so embarrassing. It was mortifying. But I thought, well, she's going to leave me one day anyways, because the way I'm acting like such a jerk. I'm being such a, If she's going to leave me, then I want her to know why she's leaving me. I want her to know why I'm acting the way I am. And so I remember the evening of our 25th anniversary. I remember even before we left, I looked at flights for her, one-way flights home, because I thought when I tell her, I don't blame her, she's going to want to leave. So I actually looked and had flights in the background ready to go if she wanted to go home. Then we sat down, and I don't even remember how the conversation got started. How do you do this? On the evening of your 25th wedding anniversary, you're supposed to talk about the good things, the great things, and all the wonderful things that you've accomplished together as a couple. You were married for 25 years, your kids, your successes, your ministries, your businesses. And I just sat there and I began to tell her one thing at a time. I began to share with her the first time that I remember being raped. The pain that I felt, the physical pain of being dry raped against your will. And how this continued for months and months. And then I remembered another man in a separate attack. And I remembered another and another. And to date, I can remember 5 different men who abused me in 5 different scenarios. And I began to share with my wife all the things that I had been coping with and what my mind was going through, and how I was reeling with shame, so ashamed because of what was going on in my mind, and I didn't understand why. I remember thinking, what is wrong with me? Why do I think this way? Why am I this way? Why did it happen to me? Maybe I was asking for it. Maybe it's something I really wanted, and they picked up on it, and so they took advantage of that. And it would take many, many conversations with a counselor, with a therapist, to realize that I was a victim, that they were the predators who saw someone and took advantage of them, that I did nothing to encourage it. I did nothing to want it. You're a boy. You're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. You're a boy. You don't even know what that kind of stuff is. What do you mean it's what you want? No, they were predators. They preyed on you. They are the ones who are guilty. They are the attackers. They are the villains in the story, not you. Not the one who gets abused. You're not the villain. They're the villain. And I remember sharing all this background with her and just pouring out my guts, telling her things that I thought I would never tell a soul, things I thought I would take to the grave. The only future I saw was a lonely one. Because I remember thinking, as soon as I tell her, she's going to leave me, my kids are going to find out, and they're going to be embarrassed about who their dad is and what happened to him. And I remember sitting on that bed with her and looking at her and saying, I was raped, I was abused, and because of that, here are the struggles that I've had. And then I remember her looking at me with those piercing Irish blue eyes. She looked at me and she goes, there you are. I said, what do you mean? She goes, there's the man I married 25 years ago. You've been hiding behind this mask for so long, I've forgotten what you really look like. And the more vulnerable I became with her, the more real I became, the more she saw who I really was, and she put her head on my neck and we cried together. She said, I see you again. I see you now for who you really are. I remember this Joe. She thanked me for sharing with her. She thanked me for opening up with her and to her about all that I had been through and gone through. And then I remember being so angry with the enemy. I remember being so angry saying, this is what I was afraid of? I thought for sure if I told her I was going to lose her. And then when we got back home, I sat down my kids and I shared with them. And they did the same thing. And they hugged me and they embraced me and they wept with me. And they said, Dad, you've had to do this by yourself all these years. Dad, you've had to walk this road by yourself all this time? You're so brave, Dad. You're so brave to have held all this in and still accomplish all the things you've accomplished. And the exact opposite of what I thought would happen happened. I thought they would be ashamed of me because I let this happen to me as a boy. And they said, Dad, you're the bravest guy I know. Because in spite of what was done to you, look what you've accomplished. Look what God has done with your life. And this is the crux. This is the heart of the conversation today. We believe the lie that if we tell people, or if we show people, if we reveal to them the pain that we're going through, that they're going to leave us, they're going to abandon us. And so we isolate ourselves. We don't wait for them to isolate us. We do it ourselves. We're like, well, clearly nobody's going to want to hang out with me. I'm a degenerate. I'm gross. I'm disgusting. I'm a throwaway. So I'm going to remove myself from the situation. And so we have men who leave their spouses, who leave their families, pastors who leave their churches. You know that 1 in 6 men in North America were sexually abused as boys by men? You do the math of how many men there are in North America, and you think of how many men are living in darkness, who are living in absolute shame and fear. Because who can they tell? Especially for those of us who are in ministry. Who can I tell? If I tell my board, they're going to fire me, or they're going to tell me to go get healed, and then I'm not going to be able to get paid. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose everything I have. And so they don't say anything. So these men, these poor men, they suffer. They suffer in these prison cells that they've created for themselves. And they live there for years, and some live there for decades because there's nowhere to turn. They feel like they have no one that they can talk to. How many marriages and families are destroyed because the men feel that if they tell their wives are going to be disgusted by their thought life. They're going to be disgusted by the struggles they've endured because of what happened to them when they were young. You see, that's the great lie. That's the great lie. Is that you can't tell anyone, that you got to keep it to yourself, man. You just got to bury it, cover it up, be funnier, be better, be more successful. And that'll cover it up. And you know what, man? It's like just putting paint over a cockroach. It's going to keep coming up. It's not going to die. It's going to keep coming up. No matter how many colors you put on that thing, it's going to keep coming back to life. And I was so afraid. I was so afraid of telling the truth. I was so afraid of sharing my story that I was willing to live in darkness and sin and shame. But when I came clean, and when I shared honestly and openly and humbly what I've been through, I found love. I found acceptance. I wish I could tell you that from the moment that I confessed all these things to my wife and began to talk with professionals and began to share about what I'd gone through, that my life has been perfect. Oh, it hasn't. But I'm so much further ahead than I was. And this is what I want to say, especially to the men who are listening to this. And ladies, if you've been listening to this and going, I think I see some of these things in my husband, share this podcast with him. Don't confront him. Don't challenge him. Don't belittle him. Just say, here, honey, listen, here's a podcast from Joe Amaral. I think you might need to hear this. So if you're a spouse of someone who's exemplified some of the symptoms that I've been talking about, maybe this is something that you can use that'll start a conversation that I hope and pray will open up a new era of honesty and change for you. If you're a guy, if you're a younger teenager and you're listening to this and you know what happened to you, you've had the flashbacks, or maybe it happened so recently that you don't have to flash back, you remember it really well. And you feel like you can't talk to anybody, and so you've locked it away and you're living in solitude. Maybe on the outside, you're the fun guy, you're pretending to be all that. I did it too, man, and it works for a while, but after a while your body says, okay, we're done. We're done. We can't cover this up anymore for you. Don't get to that point that I got to. Don't get to that place of desperation. Find someone that you trust and just begin to share with them some of the things that you're going through. It's not that you have to tell them every detail of your life, but share the experience. Because what I found is that when you share the experience, it's like you're opening up the door and all of a sudden all this light comes into the room. And guess what? The cockroaches run when they see the light. The enemy runs when he sees the light. Darkness breeds darkness. But light exposes and expels darkness. So if you're a man out there and you know that you were sexually abused by a man when you were a young boy, find someone that you can speak to. If you have a spouse that you know will listen, that begin to share with that spouse. Pray about the right time. Humble yourself and prepare yourself to be able to share that experience. Maybe you're not at that place in your relationship. Find a counselor, find somebody in your community who specializes in this kind of trauma. Guys, you don't have to live in darkness. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to struggle. You don't have to do it alone. There are millions of men across our country who can identify with what you're going through, and I'm one of those men. And I'm here to tell you that I, Joe Amaral, am not just a victim, but I'm the victor. When we talk openly and honestly about what we've been through and we share our experiences, not only does it release us, not only does it help us, but it helps those other men who have gone through the same thing that we have gone through. So to all my friends out there, to all my male listeners, if you have been through what I've been through, if you have been a victim of childhood male sexual abuse, be silent no more, my brothers. Be silent no more. The only shame is what was done to you. You are not at fault. You are not to blame. So I want you to own what happened to you. Dispel the darkness. Expel the darkness by beginning to talk about it. And I think you're going to be surprised by the response of the people in your life. I haven't shared it with everyone, and for many people, this is the first time they're ever hearing about it because it's an incredibly personal thing. And because I have a public life, I knew that it was time to use this platform to be able to talk about this issue. It's not something I ever could have done on the TV show I had, and it wasn't really material for the kind of sermons that I was doing. But this platform, I just feel like this was the time where God said, now, I want you to tell your story. And I'm praying and hoping that even if one guy is listening to this, and then he gets the boldness, and he gets the courage, and he gets the bravery, that's the word, that you would get the bravery to tell your story, that I could shorten your sentence in that self-made prison, then it's worth going public. Then it's worth telling my story on this platform. Men, it's time to stop living in shame. It's time to start living a life of victory. Rise up and be the man that God has called you and made you to be. The husband, the father, the friend, the uncle, the brother, the whoever it is. It doesn't matter if you're 13 or if you're 83 or anywhere in between those ages. It's time to rise up, men, and be free of the shame that abuse has brought to you. And instead of holding that to yourself, begin to use your story. You will be surprised. When I began to tell certain people in my life what had happened to me, it was like they looked over the shoulder and they said, me too. It happened to me too. There's more men in your group of friends than you could ever imagine who have been through what you have been through, and they're just looking for someone to lead the charge. Be that someone. Lead the charge today. Tell your story to people that you trust. You're going to be overwhelmed by the response, by the love, by the empathy, by the compassion of those people in your life. So friends, if you know of someone or you suspect someone in your life has been abused because you've heard some of the symptoms of depression, the anxiety, the fear, all those things that I've talked about, if you've recognized that in someone's life, share this podcast with them. Let's get the message out. Men, it's time we stopped being ashamed and living in the past. It's time for us to stop carrying this anchor that's been weighing us down and keeping us from becoming all that God has created and designed us to be. And I pray that hundreds, thousands, dare I say millions of men out there would be set free because I told my story today. And I pray that God will give you the courage and the bravery to tell your story. Wow. Well, my friends, that's the first time I've actually heard that back since I taped it on February 22nd in my hotel room in Jerusalem. I don't know about you, but for me that was it was hard to hear at some moments. Being that exposed, being that open, that vulnerable. But I do it gladly because I hope and I pray that this podcast would serve as a launching point for hundreds of thousands of men out there to begin their journey of healing, their journey to freedom, their journey to victory. In fact, one of the verses that really helped me to be able to do this is in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, and it says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." You see, we're not supposed to be selfish with our healing. We're not supposed to be selfish with our journey and hold on to it just for ourselves. Oh, wow, God help me get out of this. Yay for me. And we keep it to ourselves and we don't share it with others. No, that's actually not the point of the journey of healing. The point is so that once you understand what it's like to be on the other side of this thing, and it takes a long time to get to the other side, but keep going because you will get to the other side. And so when we get to this other side of the healing journey, the Bible says that God comforts us so that we in turn can comfort others who find themselves in times of trouble and struggles in their lives. So I'm praying that as I've been able to share this with you today, that you will take this and let it be that launching point for you to begin that journey of healing. And my prayer is that many, many men out there would hear this today and that they would grab this by the horns, as they say, and take control over their destinies and over their futures. Don't let the abuse of your past define who you are. It's a part of you. It will always be a part of you, but you can make it. In fact, I want to say to you today, you will make it.